I think it's how people define what trauma is. And when they think trauma, they think about like a war type trauma, like they saw something atrocious, right? Like a murder or something like horrible. But trauma can be so not necessarily that kind of a scary, big, atrocious thing, but for a child, let's say, right? I'm talking about a child in this case. Trauma can be parents forgot to pick me from daycare.
Yeah.
Or left me at the gas station when they were getting gas and everybody got in the car and drove away, and then they like forgot, like, or remember, there's one child is missing. Let's go back.
Or it could just be someone said something to you in a way that maybe it wouldn't have been traumatic to one person, but the way that it was sent to you in that time, in that moment, you took that internal and you internalized that in a traumatic way.
Exactly.
Right?
So we're so complex, like our brain and our like system's so complex, and just saying it's only one way you can get trauma and there's no way you can get another way, or because your parents are perfect and there's actually no perfect parents.
Right. And let's talk about it. Good afternoon and welcome to Finding New Waters. My name is Graham Doerge and I'm the founder and CEO of New Waters Recovery in Raleigh, North Carolina. I'm joined today by our medical director, Dr. Harold Hong, and Zumrad Ahmedjanova. Zumrad is a clinical social worker, addiction specialist, certified supervisor, and owner of a group practice called The Art of Wellness. She spirals her expertise and passion into every aspect of her work. With over 15 years of experience, diverse educational background, and fluency in multiple languages, Zumrad embodies a unique approach that fosters healthy relationships and embraces the connection between mind and body. Guiding individuals and couples through personal and professional challenges, Zumrad utilizes her vast expertise in addressing emotional problems, offering support and healing. Her commitment to professional growth and collaboration with renowned experts further enhances her ability to provide empathetic and effective therapy. In addition to her therapeutic practice, Zumrad runs couples workshops that offers invaluable guidance and support for relationships. The upcoming relationship marriage preparation one-day workshop on May 7th is tailored specifically for couples who are early in their relationships, providing them with the tools and insights needed to build a strong foundation. As a speaker and a supervisor, Zumrad shares her knowledge on the biopsychosocial perspective and strategies for emotional well-being. Connecting with diverse audiences and clients in a meaningful way, in the ever-evolving field of therapy and healing, Zumrad stands out as a powerfully effective therapist and leader, enriched by her deep understanding of cultural identity. Our goal in creating Finding New Waters is to provide a resource for families to help navigate the complexities of supporting a loved one struggling with substance use or mental health. When we find ourselves in crisis due to one of these issues, most people have no idea where to turn. We hope to shed some light onto what is often the darkest hour for many families. Thank you very much for being with us today, Zumrad.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. Yeah. It's an honor too.
Fantastic. Thank you. Well, and, I like to kind of start off in this way because I find it's always very interesting to get a little bit of background and understanding of maybe how you found yourself coming into this field, how you found yourself doing this type of work, and really what drives you, what kind of brought you to work into the behavioral health field to begin with.
Well, I did my master's in cultural anthropology. And I was very interested, like, in the dynamic between, like, human and society. And I was going deeper and deeper into that. I got, like, more into psychology part of it. Yeah. Because you just cannot separate those two. It just felt like that to me at that time. And when it came question, like, what's next for me? And I was talking at that time with my advisor. He because I was also new to United States. And I was telling this is what my aspirations and that's what I want to do. And I was thinking of going further, do a PhD. And he asked, what do you want to do with your PhD? And it was such a good question. Like, what do I want to do with PhD? So I thought, I really want to work with people. And he said, this is not the right field for you. He said, probably social work will be a better field for you. Yeah. So that's how I kind of pivoted and I went to do my social work
Yep.
master's degree at UNC. Actually, I got to UNC, and that's how the whole process started
Very nice.
for me.
Very
Yeah.
nice. And I know specifically you work a lot with couples and relationships. Can you
Yeah.
elaborate a little bit on that and your kind of the modalities that you use around that?
Yeah. So, well, when I started working with individuals, like I just could not avoid but like noticing what really affects individuals. So it's like slowly just doing DBT and CBT. That's how it started, and this is how we all mostly trained, in programs and social work programs. I started noticing that there's more into that. Like, so the past affect people, like their childhood effect, the way how they grow up with their parents, the attachment styles. So I started like looking for the attachment styles.
Yep.
As I started looking for attachment styles and studying it more, I started learning, like in addition to attachment styles, there is a part of like how they regulate themselves. Like, okay, like they have insecure attachment, like how they can regulate themselves. So I got into somatic experiencing modality, like learning regulation and how to titrate those, like titrate the ways of discomfort in the body.
Yeah. And how are you doing that specifically? Talk a little bit about the somatic
The
experiences.
somatic work, it's a really interesting actually modality because it basically says that body never lies. You can tell your brain this is what's happening, but body will show.
Right.
And the body is not even on level of, it's kind of like so subconscious. It's very intuitive that sometimes people don't even understand. They just feel weird.
Yes.
They don't. They cannot really name it or pinpoint and put finger on that. And the somatic work helps to like really get in touch with the body and say, okay, what is it I'm really feeling in the moment? What's happening?
Yeah.
It's like some very subtle things, like the way how we look, the way how we recognize things. Like it's a milliseconds of memories.
Yes.
Of milliseconds of like emotions. It's so fast because like the neural pathways in our brain became so so fast when we connect one event and the trigger that happened before, right? It happens so fast how we react to that. It can just take milliseconds.
Yes. There's huge research going on these days about interoception.
Yeah.
Which is the feelings that we receive from our bodies. And it's breaking up this whole idea that we are our brain. Like if it's not in our brain, then it doesn't matter. And we're really depriving ourselves of so much of our wisdom and our skill when we don't pay attention to our body. And it shows up everywhere. Most interestingly is it shows up in traders. So on Wall Street, in London, the traders who listen to their gut about go or no go do better than the people who develop these elaborate PowerPoint presentations about things.
Right.
And it's so interesting because when it comes to relationships, I feel like there are so many people who have a gut feeling about their partner, but their addiction or their social expectation tells them to do something else.
Yeah.
And it usually doesn't work out.
That's right. It's like there's a belief system or societal expectation or family expectation, and then my gut. And when my gut against all of that, it's just so hard to like them talk to each other.
Yeah, I'm 31. I should be married. I should be having kids now.
Yeah, a career, perhaps.
I'm on this trajectory, but this person's not the right person. But it's who I'm with now, right? And I think people get into long-term relationships where they're people they shouldn't be, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
So...
But actually, attachment style, there's a really interesting New York Times article that came out talking about how TikTok has put so much psychological language into the world, and now it's getting into dating profiles. Wow. So when you were talking about attachment styles, so now it's very common on like people on Hinge, Coffee Meets Bagel, Tinder, to talk about your relationship style as part of your bio.
Wow, interesting.
That's nice.
But there are a lot of people out there who've missed that boat. Like, if you're married and like over 35, maybe you've missed that boat. So I would love it if you could tell us a little bit about what are these attachment styles and why is it helpful to know about them?
Yeah. That's just well, there are four main attachment styles, and different researchers kind of call them differently, but I will call them just to make it simple.
Great.
There's a secure one,
Uh-huh.
right? It's where in the relationship, we just feel like we can be autonomous and independent and be okay in our own body, in our own thoughts and feelings, and feel like the world is okay and I'm okay. And that's a really,
Secure.
That's a secure, right? And then there are three insecure attachment styles, which one is anxious, and one is avoidant, and one is disorganized.
Mm-hmm.
So, and all of them kind of like really interesting how it works together, because it's not necessarily that, let's say, if I have secure attachment, I have secure attachment with everybody in my life, in my relationship. For example, I might have secure attachment with my mother and insecure attachment with my father, or avoidant attachment with my boss, and we just can go the attachment style does not necessarily will go for all aspects of my life.
Mm-hmm.
It will depend on with whom I am in what relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And the more I have of one type of attachment with most of the people, probably that kind of shows a lot to me. This is what I will bring also to therapy. This is what I will bring to my relationship. This is what I will bring to my workplace. Like, how do I see the world? Am I okay in that world, or I'm not okay in the world? Or I'm the only one okay and the world is not okay?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So this is super interesting. If in couples where you have one person who's sober and another one who's actively drinking excessively or using some other intoxicating substance, what do you think is going on with the attachment styles in that relationship that keeps them together in this kind of dysfunctional way of being together? But they also think it's like dysfunctionally functional is how I've heard some people narrate it.
Right.
Yep.
So it's when two people become one, and that create kind of I don't want to say it's codependent, but I will say like it's symbiotic relationship.
Right.
So this is where the developmental model kind of kicks in for me, because I start looking at things from the developmental perspective. Developmentally, every relationship also go through the stages, and just like the same stages that the child would go through, as they grow, developmental stages. So when the couple is so like enmeshed, and when one is using substances, right, and another one is just like not using substances but staying with that, there's still something is happening where they prefer to act like one person versus two separate individuals. So being independent, being separate, actually more threatening to that couple, than than being together. So they keep staying together because that feels more secure.
Right.
And that security is a false security, because it's security for a short period of time, or for a short time, or for the moment. But in the long run, there's a lot of loneliness happening. People really miss each other.
Yep. Not connecting.
Not being for each other, or being in each other's life. And at the same time, not having a strong sense of self.
Yeah.
That they can like really hang on to, like rely on to. So they keep coming back to that relationship because that's the only thing they know.
Yeah. And I think a lot of times too, it's the only thing they know. It's what, and maybe they were in some sort of a dysfunctional situation growing up, and that's comfortable to them, right?
That's kind of a weird comfort zone. It's really not comfortable, but that's a known one. It's like a familiar.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, if I know what's familiar, I know how to deal with that, versus if I don't know what's familiar, how can I deal with that?
Right.
Yep.
But at the same time, I feel like there is this ability to imagine this isn't right. This could be better, or this is not healthy for me. But there's many voices going on in their mind at the same time. So how do you work with someone who's negotiating? Do I go left or do I go right on this relationship? Do I stay enmeshed and in this strange sense of we're very close but very lonely at the same time, versus we could change and maybe be healthy people and have real intimacy in recovery?
Yeah, that's such a good question. And it comes often when people come, to therapy. it's or even that question themselves, like, what do I do? I'm not happy here, but where do I go? So I think one of the biggest thing is what are my goals for myself and who I am in that relationship. And when people come to me, I usually ask, like, there's a goals for you as a couple, but there's also goals for you as a separate individual.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want to grow as a couple, you have to grow also as individual.
Wow.
You have to grow as individual. You cannot be in that relationship without that personal internal growth, where I see myself as separate, differentiated person, not enmeshed with another person, but like I can rely also on my ability to recognize my own feelings, my own triggers, my own whatever is my own.
Yeah.
Because like in substance use, right? Like when there's an addiction in a family going on, there is love and attachment, but not to the primary person. It's love and attachment to the drug of choice.
Right.
There's a relationship there.
Oh, 100%.
There's no relationship with another person. And the question is, do I want to have that secure relationship with my partner or with my parents or with my children? Or I keep choosing that love affair that I have on the side.
Wow.
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, you said so much there.
Yeah,
That's like an hour's worth of conversation right there. I just think I've worked with people who you ask them, what do you want in life? And they shut down. They're terrified of that question, and they feel shame that they don't know the answer to that simple question. But I go back and I review with them. Were you ever taught to have a goal? Like, were you ever validated to have your own interests or desires? And it turns out, like, no, I was always supposed to be a straight A student and be a doctor or be this or that. Like, my parents mapped out my whole life for me.
Right.
And if I went outside of the box, I would get yelled at, or I would get rejected, or I would be told I was stupid. So I think that can be like a really challenging starting point for people.
Right.
You know, and it makes intimacy seem unattainable for people. Like, oh, like now you're telling me unless I know what I want for myself, I can't have a healthy relationship. Well, then I give up.
Right.
So some people, it can feel really overwhelming. So how would you interact with a client who's not responding well to this, in my opinion, like a realistic and hopeful vision for the future, but to them, it's interpreted as
almost impossible,
an overwhelming assignment.
Yeah. Well, that's by itself is diagnostic. Just that kind of vignette, right? You see, like when there's two ways how developmental trauma, can be imposed by caregivers, by parents. Two main ones. One, when the parent is so anxious and so uncomfortable for whatever reason, maybe for their own personal history, medical history, something is going on in the family.
Ancestral trauma.
Trauma. The parent is so anxious, so they give the child the message, the world is not okay. Yeah. There's a danger in the world. It's dangerous to live out there. And that can be traumatic on a child. And the second way, how parents can actually do that on a child is when the parent themselves overwhelmed, again, for whatever reason, mental health, medical, something else going on in the family, but they're so overwhelmed, so they kind of like pull attention to themselves and they become needy. So and they push the child away, where they say, you cannot depend on me, like the unspoken message, you cannot depend on me. So the child grows up being, in a way, kind of independent, pseudo-independent, but it's really not independency. They learn how to take care of themselves. So by the time they go to college, if they go to college, right, by the time they're out of the house, they're so independent. So like, I'm going to put like in quotes, independence, right? So So they don't need anybody. It's actually very threatening to them if somebody wants to be dependent on them, because it's just like same dynamic that was in a childhood.
Right.
So when they are married, they don't understand why the spouse wants connections and be close and tell and share things, because for them it's very triggering.
Yep.
So,
Wow.
and this is like two main reasons, right? Like how people get insecure attachment too, with anxious and avoidant, because of those developmental traumas early in the childhood. And it comes oftentimes how people cope with that. And one of the ways of coping is substances, all kinds of substances. And like the most available is alcohol, right?
Right.
But it can be like, other compulsive behaviors, other addictions, like to certain behaviors, So it can be workaholism, right?
Yep.
I'm coming home, I'm bringing money, and why you, my partner, my spouse, is like demanding from me something. Like, am I not doing enough?
Right.
Right.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah,
So,
I just want to come home and sit down on the couch and nobody bother me, and I
Right.
work, and I should be able to do what I need to do. Right?
yeah, because
And,
like this is like,
but it's a partnership, right?
Right.
And you both kind of have a role in that, especially when you have kids and all
Exactly.
of that. So that's a tough one for sure.
it's a tough one. And what we're modeling for children
Yeah.
also.
Yeah.
But if all this is, a lot of it is coming from attachment style, is it like your family is a mold and you leave and you're forever molded in that shape, or is it something that you can resculpt?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And that's the good thing, right, about the neuroplasticity, like and the secure attachment, that it can be built. It's like, it's not forever. Like it requires work. Internal work, on self. But there's always, we can develop those secure attachments slowly and slowly, with other people around us.
Yeah.
And we can develop, like starting with our animals, starting with maybe coworkers and friends. And like we can expand. We have examples always of secure attachment.
And I think too, like a lot of it as well is and so Dr. Hong does a genogram with a lot of our assessment clients, or with all of our assessment clients, right?
Awesome.
So he sits down for a few hours and works through. Have you done genograms?
Yeah.
I would assume. Yep. And it's pretty eye opening for them. And I think so much of it is just awareness, right? It's just the awareness and understanding of like how we have these attachments and where they're coming from, and the family history, and and when you start to kind of look at the generations back in the genogram, you're like, oh my gosh, and like I had no idea, but now this all makes sense, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
kind of developmental stages there. Like if the child did not go through a certain developmental stage, like for example, autonomy,
Yeah.
like learning how to be autonomous and independent starting age 2, right? From age like 18 months to 3 years old. This is like the first stage of when the child tried to differentiate and say like me, myself, and saying for the first time no to parents. And if parents is overwhelmed or scared or anxious or like all kinds of things, right? And push child saying, no, you cannot say no to me. How dare you, for a 2-year-old kid?
Right. They're not used to that.
That, so like they can overpower child at that time.
Yeah.
But then the second time it comes during the teenage years, when the differentiation comes with more strength, because it happens that the hormonal level changes too.
Yep.
It's like very natural, very developmentally, absolutely appropriate to differentiate again, saying who I am now. Like I'm trying to understand what's my role in the world, what's my identity. So when they develop that and parent again pushes that becomes dangerous even more.
Right.
And so the child grows up like constantly having this like, I can't, I have to like look behind and look like, is it okay for me to speak up, to have a voice,
Right.
have an opinion, like, or do I need even to cope with whatever overwhelming feelings I have, and what kind of things are available for me to cope with?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in the genogram that we talk about, it's what always surprises me is it usually begins with the client saying, I had a great family. I couldn't have asked for more. Things like perfect, loving, warm, cuddly, everything I could have wanted or needed. Like
And
that
that's
is
the
how
story
they
that we
describe
tell
it.
ourselves, right? And that's
Right.
all comes back to
Right.
this perception and the attachments that we kind of that we just kind of present ourselves too, right?
Right. And then we talk about, well, what was this relationship like? Oh, there was a divorce here. Oh, there was an infidelity there. Looks like there was a lot of alcoholism across the family. What was it like growing up in that environment? And then a word like lonely pops up, and I sense that there's a lot of shame about it, and they don't want to be real about it. They feel embarrassed about it. But then as we work through it, they feel a sense of like liberation, like finally a light has come on, and like they see a path for themselves to not repeat like the pattern that's been transmitted generation and generation. But it takes a lot of work, like what you were saying, like to change your, so a lot of times there's an insecure, anxious, or avoidant or disorganized attachment style across all those relationships, and it's just getting transmitted. But when they come here, they do the detox. Their mind is much clearer, and they're thinking straight about where do I want my life to go, and that is like such a sacred and spiritual moment of hope, and like it's so inspiring to see that happen.
Like regaining sense of self.
Yes.
Like getting to know like who I am.
But people are afraid to see themselves. I think they come in here feeling afraid to see themselves, feeling afraid to say what they really think or what they really feel about a relationship. But they go through the detox, they go through the restorative therapies here, and they suddenly have the energy to think about things clearly and honestly. And that's really exciting. But there are people who they want to leave here and they just want to jump back into life. Like they think that they can make like a 180 effortlessly just by going back to their daily life. And I think they truly believe it, and I'm not there to say that they're being like naive or they're making a big error in judgment. But I think what's curious for a lot of people is they think that this can happen without making a change in their relationship to alcohol. Like they think that my partner can keep using or I can keep using, and we can change our attachment style. We can go back into our history. And my approach is to be really curious, to be honest. And I'm curious about what your experience is with that. Can people stay in their systems, stay in their addictions, and still make progress?
Not my experience, actually. Unfortunately, people cannot really make any changes if they're not addressing addiction. Yeah, it's like you can't have an affair with addiction thinking, it's really something small. It's really not. And sometimes it takes time for a person to come to that conclusion, and it's very humbling, actually, experience to finally come to the conclusion like I can't do it on my own. I need something. Or I really need to work on that. I really need to claim my life back. Because like the years like that lost, relationship that has been broken, career that has not been done. Like it was so many, the time lost, and also respect that they had for themselves lost, or like kind of gaining it all back, earning it all back.
Takes time.
It takes time, and fortunately, there are resources out there. There are resources out there.
Well, and I also think too that like even in early recovery, so much of it is like breaking that identity. Because like I know for me, when I was first getting sober, my whole identity was like the fun party guy, went to lots of concerts, and like that was who I was, right? And then all of a sudden I wasn't that person anymore because I couldn't do that anymore. Oh my gosh, identity crisis. Who am I? Right? And that's a scary thing. And to just kind of think like, what is my life going to be like if I can't be doing these things, which is essentially all I did. And I think, obviously it's very scary initially. The reality is, the world is our oyster and life is so amazing in recovery. It's just hard for us to see that at first, right?
Yeah.
But that's a huge piece, I think, is making that connection for people in early recovery and showing them, right? And a lot of us live by example, and that's a big thing, but it's a hard thing to wrap your head around in those early days.
Yeah,
For
that's
sure.
true. But you mentioned like you so much on point about identity crisis because it absolutely happens.
Yeah.
That identity crisis happens after getting sober and not knowing what to do. I'm also thinking about like neurobiologically what happens to that person, right? Like how the neurotransmitters like really asking for endorphins and for like serotonin and I'm kind of blinking on the other one.
Dopamine.
Dopamine, right?
Yeah.
Because like it's so much dopamine released, and now you're not bringing anything for that hungry dopamine.
Yeah, 100%.
Like give me something. So I'm very uncomfortable.
Right.
It's so uncomfortable. So like, yeah, having support helps that the person is not alone in that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
100%.
absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, one irony about that though is the people who I know who are in sustained recovery would say they are definitely now their true self, and the person that they thought they were was not really them.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I almost see it as like Act 1 and Act 2, right? And
Right.
and my
That's awesome.
previous life was, that was, I don't even remember that person really. It's really wild. Looking back on that, because life is, recovery has given me everything, and my wife and family and kids and all these amazing things, and obviously a career and working in this field and all that. But yeah, in the beginning, there were definitely some days where what is this going to be like? And so I think it's just interesting to just think around that. And I'd love to talk a little bit more with you too, because I know Dr. Hong always says this one piece that I love, that he says, where there's substance use, there's trauma, right? And I'd love to, obviously trauma is a real buzzword these days in our field, but obviously I think it's very it's very valid that we're self-medicating, essentially, and we're using these substances for some reason, and a lot of times that's trauma, or there's some underlying issue that we haven't really identified yet, and that's kind of our goal, is to really figure out what that thing is. But talk to us a little bit about the trauma work that you do with your clients and all of that.
Yeah. Well, absolutely. Like with substance abuse comes trauma, and sometimes trauma can be like primary, and substance use become like a coping mechanism and a symptom of that trauma.
100%.
Totally.
Sometimes people actually have already they develop addiction because of mental health, or something happened earlier. Let's say genetics too, right? Like there's genetics play, and then trauma happens while they using substances. So like it's just constantly all around, whether it's a secondary or it's a primary, but the trauma will happen in person's life. So but without addressing substance use, it will be really hard to address trauma.
Right.
Because person has to get first to the place of sobriety, like and that's the difficult part, that sometimes people, because that substance helped them to survive.
100%.
So
Yes.
how can I let it go if I survived because of using?
Right.
Whatever it's, whether it's alcohol or opiates or cocaine, whatever. Like I survived because I had that. If I wouldn't had that, how can I survive? So like this is how, like what I start doing is working on differentiation from that, like learning that you are not that trauma, you are not the substance that you're using, like finding who I am, like deeply down. And yes, like the part of self-regulation comes in, mindfulness comes in, spirituality comes in, like learning how to take care of the body, how to take care of self, how to take care of like the thought process, the mind, where the mind goes, like where I'm focusing, where I'm channeling my energy, because where my energy goes, this is like where my thought goes, this is what I will be end up doing.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think people they react initially like very strongly to the proposition that maybe you've experienced trauma. Um, and they're like, how dare you?
Right.
Like, how dare you accuse my parents of being abusive? You know, my parents were leaders in the community. My parents would never do something that, you know, like beat me or do something horrible to me. Like, that's not my parents. And then I say, yes, like that's how we ordinarily talk about trauma. Like, trauma is criminal behavior, but just because it's not criminal behavior doesn't mean it was not trauma
I
at the same
agree
time.
because like I think it's how people define what trauma is, and when they think trauma, they think about like a war type trauma, like
Yes.
they saw something atrocious, right?
Right,
Like a murder or something like horrible. But trauma can be so not necessarily that kind of a scary, big, atrocious thing, but for a child, let's say, right? I'm talking about a child in this case. Trauma can be parents forgot to pick me from daycare,
Yeah.
or left me at the gas station when they were getting gas, and everybody got in the car and drove away, and then they like forgot, like, oh, remember, oh, there's one child is missing. Let's go back.
Or it could just be someone
Yeah.
someone said something to you in a way that you know,
Right.
maybe it wouldn't have been traumatic to one person, but the way that it was sent to you in that
Right.
time, in that moment, you took that internal and you internalized that
internalized
in a
that.
traumatic way.
Exactly.
right?
So we're so complex, like our brain and our like system's so complex, and just saying it's only one way you can get trauma and there's no way you can get another way, or because your parents are perfect and there's actually no perfect parents.
Right. And let's talk about that.
So like you don't have to have trauma. It's also understanding that how I respond to things, like whether my consent has been taken away when I was trying to say something and I couldn't have my consent. So all these like things, they're really not really little, and at the moment they feel little. For somebody they look little, or somebody actually can say, "Oh, this is small thing to cry about. Why would you cry about it? This is so small. Stop it."
Right. Yep.
And they're like, "Oops, I'm not supposed to."
Yeah.
And they're like,
Meanwhile, it's the core memory that creates all this dysfunction in their relationship.
yeah.
Right. Where like the partner is working too much, drinking too much, and they have to be quiet about it because they just feel like they're not committing a crime against me. I should just, why should I cry about it?
Yeah.
But that makes that intimacy in that relationship, which they both want,
Definitely.
unattainable.
Yeah, will definitely affect relationship.
Yeah, we'll have to.
It's making me very. I'm just thinking about my kids and all that right now, and it's making me terrified as a parent. You know, it's worried that you're messing your kids up, and I'm like, yeah.
Well, there are no perfect parents.
There's no perfect.
No perfect.
No perfect
So that
100%,
means that we're not perfect parents, but there's also not perfect children.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, I think that's a great point though, and I think that's part of how I de-escalate the defensiveness, the walls that just shoot up when I talk about the T word. Is I say, I believe your parents were doing their absolute best. I don't believe your parents are monsters. They're not evil, malicious people. They were doing their best. But their best might not have been what you needed.
Yeah, I love that.
And then, okay, now we can talk about things. And I said, you know, trauma is when you didn't get what you needed, or you got something you really didn't need. Right. And like, so to your point, like what you're talking about, we just had a client and he told me this story and made me, I thought about it and I cried after I went home from work. He was saying he was 7 years old and his parents were both heavy users of alcohol and they loved drinking and having fun to the neglect of their children. And he was 7 years old and he was starving. He had a baby brother. They were both hungry. But they were terrified to ask their parents to make dinner. So his home had a dirt track worn around it because when he got anxious and didn't know what to do, he would go outside and just walk circles around the house.
Wow.
And you know, I just think about my young children. I can't even imagine what it'd be like to walk around the house in acting out anxiety. And he never thought about that as a trauma.
Wow. That's powerful.
Yeah.
But when I told him, I heard that story and I cried, and he was like, oh, maybe there was something wrong.
And
with
then
how that happened.
at that moment, probably that person made some kind of a decision, some early decision when he decided about life, what life is, right? And who he is in that life and how to protect himself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
He did make a choice, and it didn't go on to be functional for him.
Yeah.
But he did what he needed to do to survive that childhood.
That's so important what you're saying, that like those early decisions, they help to survive. And in that moment, they're the most important thing that we could have done in that situation, given the circumstances. But later on, those decisions, like keep using those decisions, are
Yes.
not helpful anymore. So like has kind of asking self, do I need to keep that decision? Keep that like early decision I made when I was like 7, 8, 10 years old? Or I'm grown now enough so I can change that decision and have another decision because I can change it. I can make up a different mind about it.
Right. Yeah.
And getting that autonomy back. Yeah.
So, moving on to another question. So, knowing what you know now, what would you like to share with your younger self just starting out?
Oh. I probably just say like relax.
Relax.
Just breathe a little bit. Yeah. There was a lot of worry and anxiety. Will I make it? Will I make it?
Mm.
Will I also get it across? And when you ask that question, are you asking me as a person or are you asking me as a therapist?
That's a good question. I'm asking you as a therapist.
Okay. As a therapist, probably I would say something like, I didn't create it. I have no control over it. Whatever problem brought to me, because this is how I used to take it. I used to take it like, I have to fix it. I have to fix it. I have to do something about that. I would sleep. I would lose sleep about thinking about a patient, even though I knew it's not supposed to be that way, but I would think a lot.
Yeah. Well, we don't get into this work because we don't care.
Exactly.
Right. So it's hard to differentiate that a lot of times.
Right.
You know, and you know, obviously trying to leave your work at work, and you know, and what we do specifically, I mean, it's really 24/7. You know, we're getting calls, you know, all the time in the middle of the night and all of that. So finding that balance can be tough unless you got to really work at it.
That's
you know.
true.
And that's essential because obviously burnout is a very real thing in this field. So to protect ourselves. So so how can professionals or families or how can anybody find you or you know locate your services or anything like that? I know you have a website, correct?
I do have a website. It's artofwellnessnc.com. I'm in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. And everything is on my website. I see families and couples, and I'm doing a lot of these days like couples workshops and premarital, pre-relationship, early relationship, early in relationship workshops.
How often are you doing these workshops? Is that a monthly thing or?
So right now I'm doing quarterly, but I'm planning to do it more often.
Okay, great. And that's it sounds like relationship focus.
Relationship focus, yes. Yeah,
Very
like
nice.
how can we start from the better basis, like and a better foundation, or if can we actually develop a solid foundation now,
Right.
while we are like early in our relationship.
I know. I think that's huge, and I know my wife and I we did therapy before we got married, and you know we definitely did a lot of couples work before we even really embarked on a lot of those relationships. So it's really important, obviously, before you know you're essentially signing this contract with this person for
It
the
has
rest
to
of
be
your
that,
life,
right?
right?
It's a
To
contract, right?
really make sure that you guys are on the same page, and listen, that ebbs and flows and changes and throughout your relationship. But you know, I think at the core of it, if you kind of still have the same values and love for each other, it works out, right?
Yeah.
So, you have anything, Doc?
Yeah.
Great.
thank you for being here, Zumrad.
Thank you.
It's
Thank
been
you for
such a
inviting
nice
me and
conversation.
talking to
Yeah,
me. I
thank
really
you
enjoyed it.
so much. And we will absolutely, we'll put all your information on the website so people can find you and locate you at your website. But really appreciate you coming out and having a discussion with us today.
Yeah, me too.
It's fun.
Thank you for inviting.
Thanks, Zumra.
Mhm.